Hello and welcome to What We've Learned, a podcast where we discuss what we've learned. My name is Steve Kemish, and as ever, I'm joined by Shane Redding. Hello, Shane.
Hi, Steve.
Hello. So we're going to kick off with technology trends this week, and we're going to start this very week with the Martech 8000. Now, for those of you that are uninitiated on that, it wasn't always the Martech 8000. In fact, it only became the Martech 8000 this week. Previous to that, the Martech 5000. But if I rewind slightly, what that tracks is marketing technology and has done so since about 2011, when roughly there are about 150 technologies that marketeers could spend their hard-earned cash on to help improve their marketing. Since 2011, that's grown exponentially, and about 2017, it became known as the Martech 5000. There were roughly 5,000 technologies. So we've grown from 150 to 5,000. And as the name suggests, and it was published this very week at a virtual digital conference, the Martech 8000. So we as marketeers and our community have now got a hell of a menu in front of us. In fact, 8,000 possible technologies for us to use wisely or not. If you don't and you're not familiar with it, you can find more on martech5000.com, but you'd be better off listening to my old friend and colleague Shane Redding, who's going to talk to us about some of the trends. So Shane, very pertinent for you. You've been at and moderating a conference, which we'll come back to later, but marketing technology has been the center point of that. So on that Martech 8000, what are the key trends for us to start to kick around?
Well, I think the thing is for me is that I've lived through this, all of it, as have you, Steve, from the very beginning, from the couple of hundred and CRM technologies to where we are now with the 8000. And I think one of the things that's changed for me is the 8,000 or 8,000 solutions. It's not 8,000 vendors. So, huge landscape. People are now starting to talk about it as a map. The interesting thing to me this year, which I really applaud Scott Brinker for doing, is that it's the first time that it's been crowdsourced. So in effect, if you are a Martech vendor, you self-submit. So obviously that's encouraged a lot of the startups. I think I haven't analysed it yet in detail because, as you said, only come out this week. I think we'll find a lot of very, very small companies on there for the first time. But the great news is I always talk about this, and what's the point almost, apart from it's a very big picture.
It's a nice visual, isn't it? But it has to have some substance to it as well.
Yeah, and the good thing is this year, for the first time, it's now interactive. So you can now actually go into the landscape or the map and choose a segment, which could be content, data, social, look at all the providers in that, and then click into them where they have provided more detail. So if you like, it's your biggest ever long list of all the Martech that you could ever buy, and now you can actually go in and interrogate it.
Okay, that's interesting. So, because previously it's been a fairly static image file that you can just see a bunch of logos. Good point around that mapping as well, that they're starting to segment it out so you can see these relationships. Has it changed much from what we've seen? Are we talking lots of new subsections of technology here, or are we talking more vendors coming into existing spaces? So if I'm a marketer listening in, is there another new area of technology for me to think about, or is it just an increase in the providers in the core spaces that have been around for a few years?
Both. It's a great question. And so to explain that, there are 1,575 new solutions, apparently.
Which is good for our stat fans, Shane.
It is. I like the stats. I like data. And actually, talking of data as a segment within the Martech stack is the one that's grown the most.
Interesting. Okay. All right. And that plays back actually themes we've been talking about on this podcast previously and outside of this podcast with others, is how important data is. If we've got this very, very recent acceleration into digital because of the environment we sit with COVID-19, that's all very well and good, but we need that data to sit behind it to fuel those advances. But even the basics, CRM, I'm sure, is still a big sector in here. You've got to have good data to make sure that you can power some of that clever technology.
Yes, and I think that point actually is one that's been picked up in the conferences, as you say, we'll come on to. But actually, if you like, the core backbone, you can see very clearly in the Martech landscape that actually there are core providers that are now in virtually every segment. So in other words, no surprise, market leaders like Salesforce, like HubSpot, popping up in multiple segments as they acquire vendors. So there's obviously been loads of acquisition going on. So if you think about the fact that Marketo is a sub brand of Adobe, but I think they're now just leading with Adobe. So there are actually 615 logos that have disappeared since last year.
Interesting. That's a really good point, because again, from the positive of this is we've got a much bigger sweet shop, but the headache is, where do we put our money? What horse do we back, if you will? That move from those big players, the Adobes, the IBMs, the Oracles, etc., as you said, means that they can offer that one-stop shop. Just from your experience, from a consulting point of view, because I know you spend a lot of time helping organizations assess and evaluate and make selections. Is there a binary? It's much better to buy from the same provider, so one of those big boys, or to try and mix and match your selection. Any thoughts on that?
I think you've actually nailed what came across this week to me as one of the core themes that everybody's talking about, is exactly that question. And I think where we are now with that evolution is there's a real understanding, and I think you said it a long time ago about our obsession with shiny new things. There's a real understanding that actually it's about what Adam Sharp from Clever Touch termed last year and returned to this year at the Get Stacked conference, your spine, being really clear on what Martech you need to run through the funnel from the very top to the very bottom. And interesting enough, another growth area is actually more at the bottom of the funnel, and we've talked about it before with Sales Enablement Tool. So I think lots of people are at the point now evaluating their stack, slimming it down, and actually in some cases being very brave. I'm working with companies who've had legacy systems, who've got to the point where they're so fed up with the fact that they're siloed, they're not working, they're going, actually the amount of money and time to put those right, probably easier to start again.
Interesting, because it is a hard, brave decision, but it's a very important one. It often, from my experience, particularly client side in the first half of my career, but even now working agency side, where we see clients making these selections, it does put the fear into me that we're going to commit to one brand, and we're at the mercy of that brand, which comes with positives as well. They can offer a joined up, cohesive solution. They all talk to one another, or in theory they do, Shane. But that's the other thing with that acquisition to be aware of, is if company X acquires brands A, B, and C, they won't necessarily integrate any better than brands that are independent of one another. So, but you are going on that journey. So if you go down one of those big boys technology routes, you're not going to back out of it easily. That's also something that's really important.
Yeah, I know you've seen that a lot. And I think, that commitment and investment, it is a brave thing to do. But I think there also is a big frustration around the fact that perhaps, our knowledge when some of these tools first came out, and as you and I, we've worked with them, both CRM and MA over the last 10 years, is that companies perhaps were too quick to customize. And again, that's one of the themes that's come out, is that the big learnings for all of us is, customization is the death of integration. And, all of those learnings now, where if you're starting with a clean piece of paper, which startups do, you're in so much of a better place because we've got all these learnings.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, that's not about the technology. That's just about a discipline from a point of view of understanding your requirements and what you're trying to, your usage case. And again, back 20 years ago when I was client side trying to spec build of technologies that now exist that didn't exist back then. So you mentioned MA or marketing automation. We had to cobble together things 20 years ago out of Outlook and mail merge and other jiggery pokery. But to even do that, you need to just really button down your requirements, which is the dull bit, right, Shane? No one gets excited about that. The ooh shiny bit is that what it could allow us from the feature set. But if you haven't got, well, the data that we talked about already, that fuel, but the requirements, the understanding of what you need, I guess the negative side of 5,000 going to 8,000, and who knows how many technologies next year, is you've just got a bigger risk of getting it wrong if you don't really understand what you and your organization needs, and what's going to help you in the environment you're in.
I think that's a really interesting point, and it's one that's being quite fiercely debated. I mean, I actually quite enjoy doing requirements, which is why I do what I do.
Yeah.
But I think the
But not
interesting
everyone does, Shane. That's the problem, isn't it?
it is. But as you know, actually, what can easily happen is that you don't do business requirements. What does the business need? What do your customers need? You very quickly can slip into feature bingo. And being seduced, and I've been in meetings where it's happened. It's like, all of a sudden, and I know you have too, oh well, we need this. Well, why? Well, the tool can do that. Yes, but why? What's the use case? And actually, one of the most useful things I felt that at the Get Stacked event over the last 2 days was the case studies from the likes of Atos, TMF Group, 4Point, Access Group, that real honesty about the clear vision of what they were trying to do and how technology could help it. And I think that is absolutely the core of any good transformation program. Interestingly enough, the other theme was, well, it's so easy to plug and play and be agile and try things. And I think there's a bit of an understanding that actually we've perhaps gone too far down that path. I don't know what you think, Steve.
I don't know where that's coming from, because if I've learned anything over the years, if we're being slightly technical, the acronym API, which is bandied around quite easily by technology providers, effectively says, yeah, our system will talk to that system. API stands for, as we well know, it isn't going to do it quickly. And that's the danger, the hidden danger again, is if you are trying to put technology's pipework in, if you will, that your marketing automation system talks to your CRM, that talks to your, and we can play acronym bingo here all day, Shane, the DMP, and goes through to your DSP and all these different technologies. Marketeers are not technologists, so we do have to rely on help from others. And B, the systems don't just connect like that. It's not like building a Lego castle. It is much more complicated. And I think that's why your point's so good about the requirements, and timing, I think, or time scales is really important. So buying technology, that those case studies you've talked about have succeeded in the last year or so. The other thing that comes out from trend tracking is that a lot of companies have invested in technology. They're not even using half, maybe even a quarter of its capability. And that's scandalous for me, is that you must buy technology that future-proofs, but you need to buy technology you're going to really get the value out of, because you don't want to buy something and think about other walks of life where you might buy something that, if you're a learner driver, you might really fancy driving a Ferrari, but you are not going to be capable of getting the benefit of it, let alone the insurance and all the other things that go into it. So I think it's being aware, as you say, of what your requirements are and when are you likely to hit and use the features that you require in the period that you need to report on.
I agree, and I think I am a great fan of piloting and trying to build your business case through a pilot. And in fact, there was a great case study presented by Ash from Really B2B for the TMF group. And our self-interest here, I was the lead consultant on the original project helping.
Well, that's why it won an award then, Shane.
It has won an award, yeah. And it's just that, I really admire Richard Fitzmaurice, who was the CMO at the time, was saying, well, I'm not going to invest in something if I don't know the return. So how can we, without having a big transformation, how can we test and learn and prove it? And that route, we're very lucky in the UK, Europe and the USA that we have these amazing agencies who are able to run these technologies for multiple clients, learn across different industries what works, what doesn't work. I mean, you've been there, you've done it, you've got the t-shirt, Steve, and means that clients can get going much more quickly without that whole implementation headache.
Yeah, I think, again, in any walk of life, you're not necessarily going to get the money and the commitment from the all singing, all dancing. Plus, if we're bringing in a new technology or a new way of working, so let's say we want to introduce marketing automation to help generate new opportunities and leads, so net new business, it is a hypothesis, let alone the technology, the principle that this program will deliver good. So it absolutely makes sense to start small and scale it. You build the confidence and you learn what you didn't know, as well as you've taken that financial pressure off yourself, that you've not gone to your paymasters, the board, the CFO, whoever it is, for the top billing amount. You've built it in stages. And the analogy I always use, Shane, is a bit like learning to ski. You know, regardless of whether you've even tried to do it, most of us, if not all of us, know that the black run is not the place to start. We need to be on the nursery slopes and build up our knowledge and our confidence. And technology is the same. Start with a lower end technology that's going to be fit for purpose for now, and look for the signs. And again, we'll come back to Get Stacked in a second, because I really want to talk to you about what you've learned there, Shane. But I managed to drop into a couple of sessions where one of the cases was talking about, actually, you know, if you're one of their bigger clients, you are at the point that you need to move up, if we use that skiing analogy, to your next slope. But what's the point of buying black slope level technology if you're only ever going to be on the nursery level?
I think that's a fabulous analogy. And actually, yeah, I think that was Nick Mason from Turtle, with really practical steps on how to go about choosing Martech and being appropriate. And I think that's one of the things I absolutely see all the time. It's choosing the wrong size vendor for your size business. You know, you have to be honest. There are different sweet spots for the different technology providers, and if they're mainly around enterprise, guess what? That's where all their help, support, and effort go. Whereas if you're a very
so that means you risk being the very small fish in a big pond in terms of the professional services, the support, the love that you might get from that vendor. Is that what you mean?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. And funny enough, I think with my email marketing teaching hat on, it's a subject I've worked and taught over quite a long time. It's the most common piece of feedback for that technology, and I think it's very transferable. Is we are using insert well-known technology brand, and the technology is great, although it doesn't seem any different to the rest. Where we're being let down is account management support. We need people to help us, to guide us on what to do, which of course, if you're not that size of organization, you won't get. But that doesn't mean, Shane, that we should just buy the smaller vendors, because of course there's risk there as well from a point of view of, you know, as you've mentioned, how many of those 8,000 providers will be on there next year? How many have disappeared because they were startups that haven't made it or have been consolidated somewhere else? So that comes with a headache as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And so probably, yes, size is perhaps the wrong way of putting it, but more, where's their market sweet spot? Who are they? You know, are they a plug and play? You know, are they like a HubSpot where they're, if you like, their heritage, they came from supporting small businesses. So some of their self-serve is, I think, amongst the best of any technology companies in the SaaS world. They've moved up the value chain now, but as an enterprise company, it's, in my experience, still very difficult to deploy or to buy HubSpot if you've got procurement involved, because HubSpot don't go through the normal procurement process. So yeah, absolutely, it's horses for courses, or skiers for different ski slopes.
Nice. And actually, that reminds me of something I did hear you say at this Get Stacked, which was a really good point, Shane, around often technology companies, in fact, any supplier, will offer out case studies or reference sites. And of course, they're the ones that they've highly polished. And they will give you the truth in a closed room. But you made a really good point about how it's fairly easy to find customers of these technology providers yourself by going around on social media and asking or looking and trying to find your own case studies to see whether you get a different view from an average customer rather than their polished, ready to tell the world how great vendor X is.
Yeah, because you've got to leave, you know, sort of read beyond the vendor hype. And let's face it, you know, the Martech vendors are amongst the best marketers in the world. I take my hats off to them. They are brilliant at it. And
well, they're also selling
at
to a market of people that we are suckers for a good looking piece of technology or a good sales pitch as well, although we pretend we're not.
Yeah. So on that point, I would absolutely look beyond the case studies, look beyond the reference sites that they give you. Go on LinkedIn, do a shout out to your community and say, has anybody got experience of working with this tool? I've found actually, you know, picking up the phone, chatting to the CMO is really important. It was a point again that was made over the last 2 days, is that you'll get different feedback in an organization, depending on who you're talking to. So if you rely on user reviews, you might get fantastic user reviews from a software tool, but actually at board level, they're not as happy. It's not delivered on the promise. So you've got you need to talk to different people. Is it easy to use, or is it the other way around? The board is
That's a great
super
point.
happy.
That other way round, Shane's the one that, again, the danger that and Adam Sharp's point about having a spine is the other side. Of course, if you're spineless, you've just picked the easy win, which is I've bought the vendor that looks good on my CV or LinkedIn profile as the decision maker. But again, the user base, the people that are using that technology day in, day out, are the ones that are pulling their hair out because it's just not fit for purpose. So it's a really good point. Now, look, we've flirted with Get Stacked. That's something that I know you've been heavily involved in the last couple of days, although in theory you should have been involved in March. Let's just rewind. What is Get Stacked, Jane, and what have you been up to for the last couple of days?
So Get Stacked is the event for marketers run by B2B Marketing, looking at the Martech world and the Martech stack. And it's been a very successful physical event held every March for the last couple of years. And guess what? Come February, there was the realization from Joel and the team that it wasn't going to be physical. And I really admire the whole of the B2B marketing team for turning something around so quickly that should have been live, should have been held as a physical event, etc., venues in London, into a virtual event in less than 4 weeks.
Wow. I mean, and I had the fortune, excuse me, of being to just a couple of sessions yesterday, which was the day 2 of that. But you've been moderating whole stream for those 2 days, which in itself has been a fascinating experience, I'm sure. But linking, and we'll come back to that, but linking back to the Martech, what have been some of the interesting trends that have come out from those 2 days of Get Stacked?
I think, like any event or conference you go to, the value of the event, there's 3 parts to it, and I think this is something we'll perhaps go on and talk for people who are considering how they pivot their physical events to virtual. It's always all about the content. What am I going to learn? That's why people go. It's also about the networking, and it's also about, if you like, benchmarking yourself. So the kickoff for me, the keynote, which was delivered by Peter, was really good because B2B often produces, excellent reports. There's a fantastic one that I would urge everybody to download on the state of B2B Martech now, and some of the themes that are coming out. The fact that spend has gone up by the marketing department, back to a point you made earlier.
Yeah, well, on that particular report, what I like about it as well, it's only been out a month, 6 weeks tops, I think, is it's split as well. So you've got the client view and you've got the agency view. And yes, there is crossover, but it's interesting to see where an agency landscape's view of what a priority is compared to perhaps a client side marketeer in that space.
Yes, and in fact, this additional report, which was just for the conference, interviews leading CMOs as well, of their view of Martech and what's happening and the themes that come out of that. And in fact, again, some of the case studies for me were the strongest part of the content. So we heard from Atos, already mentioned TMF Group, 4Point, Access Group, brilliant presentation, real honest learnings. And I think that's the other thing to me. People are being very honest. They're talking about the mistakes they've made. They're talking about the things not to do, and they're not dressing it up as everything's easy.
And actually, apart from the fact that forget whether it's a virtual or a physical event, the content that always goes down best is that case study, but also the kind of warts of all. What have we learned that if you're sitting here listening in, however you're listening in, you can take a note on to try and avoid that cul-de-sac or that danger yourself, rather than it was all great and kind of masking over the learnings, the negatives that can be really helpful to shape other people's next steps.
Yeah, and as well as the case studies, I think there were some very clear themes coming out aimed at how do you buy Martech and how do you manage it. And one of the standout sessions for me was Emily Gravel from VMware talking about the real need to look beyond just technology, but to think about your process and your people and bringing them with you. And that was a theme that came back time and time again. Kelly Hungerford also referenced that brilliantly from Sunstare Global.
Yeah, well, that's a really good point. And in fact, it reminds me of the conversation we had on previous episode with Paul Cash around emotion and storytelling. Is the technology is the empty vessel. And we've talked about data, but if you haven't got the right content, the right story to tell, then the technology is just going to deliver more effectively bland, ineffective messaging. So, as rightly Get Stacked was focused on the functional side of things, but was there much in terms of how that marries together, how human and technology must be aligned when it comes to good quality marketing?
Yeah, in fact, there was a lovely session from Jonathan Sedger from Viz Media about tech trends and content. And he made the point brilliantly that actually, more than ever, with us all living in this digital world, not meeting physically, that we need to create wow. Whether it's at an event or whether you're reaching out through your email or on your website. And I thought that was really interesting, that what can the technology do to create that emotional engagement, whether it's sort of 360 immersive, whether it's gamification. And I know you've done VR and AR campaigns and also interactive web pages. And he showed some brilliant case studies. In fact, one of them was an award winner for a port company, of all things, Corey, about using...
Port as in transport, Shane, or as in our tipple on a Friday afternoon?
I wish it was the tipple. No, it was the port as in transport. About how they used VR to raise funds, basically, from investors on the other side of the world. So some really good examples to actually sort of see about creating wow.
Yeah, it's a fine line, actually. As you said, we've used VR quite a few times with clients over the last couple of years, and you need the wow factor, but you don't want to just be in it for gimmick. Which, funny enough, I think is back to technology selection as well. Is you can end up buying technology that's fashionable. Everyone else seems to be buying it. We should buy it without really, as we've talked about, doing the due diligence on the requirements and all the boring yet essential stuff. And using virtual reality, we've often found for events, it's been very good as a way to create stand out literally on your stand, but through DM, you're putting virtual reality headsets in the post, which may seem labor intensive and very expensive, but if you're not familiar, you can create something called a Google Cardboard, which is almost a self-assembly virtual reality headset that's passive, but because pretty much everyone in the developed world at least has a smartphone that's got VR capability built into it, it's got a clever slot in the front that you can just use your phone to give a VR experience at very, very low cost. However, so that's great. It's worked very well. It's got cut through. It's got that wow factor. As I say, I'm not a fan of gimmick for gimmick's sake. But of course, right now, Shane, you are not going to get direct mail through to people in the way that you would have done a few months ago with the lockdown. So it's also thinking, as Jonathan talked about, and I'm sure you saw elsewhere, of the environment we're in. So that whole mix, that maelstrom of the technology, the data, the content, and the timing and the appropriateness of it, which again, as I said, I think links back to some of the stuff that Paul Cash talked about, is you've got to have the right story to tell for the environment and the time you're in.
Absolutely, the right story. And I think there was a really good practical session from Ed Novermont from Warburg Pincus talking about growth marketing, and he just said basically don't forget the basics. What do your customers want? They might not want a shiny app, they want a callback, and I think that was a really key reminder to your point. With everything changing at the moment, to me, we talked about it in previous episodes, but what do your customers want and need now?
Well, it's funny, actually. It reminds me of one of the first ever lead scoring projects we worked on for a client around automation. And it was across Germany, UK, and Russia. And what we found in short summary was that the lead scoring threshold, so every time somebody opens an email, clicks on a link, that sort of thing, that out of the box level for the German market was too low. What by that, it was the most mature market for that company and that industry, and therefore they were less likely to be buying because they probably already got a provider. So you needed to nurture and to score them for longer. With the UK market, it was actually about right. And by that, I mean that you would then follow up that lead scoring with a sales contact that generated a lead. So you could measure it through leads off the back of timing. The most interesting bit, Shane, was the Russian market, which at the point in doing this was a growth area in retail. You didn't need a score higher than 0. And basically, if you'd have put marketing technology and lots of lead scoring and content in for nurturing, you'd have completely missed the boat. And therefore, the campaign was very quickly diverted to just, and it sounds old fashioned, but it worked, which is get a list and start calling these people. They want things now. They haven't got the time, and the technology would have been a disabler from a lag from recognizing that opportunity, which I thought was fascinating learning.
I think it's fascinating. I mean, as you know, I do quite a lot internationally, and I think it's one of the things that we forget. The world is very different. And I think particularly at the moment, so much is changing so fast. So one of the tech trends that was talked about is some of the tools that rely on IP, for example, and obviously, and geolocation. So things like personalization and intent. Well, obviously, with us all working at home, you know, IP tracking all very well if you're dialing in through a VPN, but if you're on your normal Wi-Fi at home with a floating IP, you know, some of the intent tracking and things is just not going to be working at the moment, not going to be picking you up. So I think that's fascinating. I think the other things like remembering we were on a virtual conference and we haven't talked about that experience yet, but that, you know, people's speeds are different, so their experience of the conference completely different. Back to your point, you know, what's if somebody's watching from Russia, what's their access speed like over the internet?
Yeah, well, there's loads of good points in there, Shane. I think the UK, Germany, Russia example absolutely could be a geography thing, but given the environment and what we're seeing with some clients, just talking, you and I out there in the world, is that certain industries, so forget the geography, if you're a UK-centered organization listening to this, industry by industry, it's changing. So that threshold can still apply to a very small geographical proximity. That industry that previously were taking a long time to make decisions, and I'm thinking of particularly in space, again, if I put my hat on for one of our technology clients in retail, certain parts of retail around grocery and hardware and sporting equipment are booming, and therefore they are desperate to buy, but far more rapidly than they would, whereas others are in regression. You know, the clothing, the traditional retailers around homeware, etc. It's a real struggle. So I think you've got to have that agility and nimble thinking to use these technologies and to adapt to the environment.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, actually that brings us on to sort of the last point about there are lots of people at the moment who are looking for virtual event software to, you know.
Yeah, so tell us about that, Shane, because it strikes me from what I observed, and you were far closer to it. It's the first time I've seen an event, and we're not talking Zoom here, so this is beyond Zoom for me. I think we've all collectively got our heads around conducting meetings via Zoom or whatever the technology is. And Zoom's almost become the new Google. In terms of Google is a verb as well as a search engine, to Zoom is also now a verb as well as a platform. That I feel sorry for the also rans, the WebExes of this world that equally offer good technology. But we're talking here recreating a conference. So you've got Expo, you've got breakout sessions, you've got networking. How was that as an experience, and what's useful for people that might have to tackle that themselves in the coming days or weeks?
I think that B2B marketing did a lot of research in terms of the platform that would try and recreate as closely as possible their physical event, which is always known for all of the events they run for fantastic networking and a really good delegate experience. And you'll make that point really well. It's not a webinar. It's not a Zoom. It goes well beyond that. So the functionality allowed you to network very easily. There was something called chat roulette, which was hilarious actually. So basically,
for anyone that's and I remember chat roulette, Shane, from the original chat roulette. If you do Google chat roulette, be blimmin' careful, because chat roulette I think it was developed by a Russian teenager many years ago. It's a great concept in chatroulette.com, but now it is polluted by people you really don't want to meet on a roulette wheel. But the principle of that is but in this platform, and the platform was, what's the technology we're dealing with here that they selected?
So they selected Hopin, which is in fact Hopin, interestingly enough, is a UK well-funded startup in this area.
Interesting. So Hopin have got, for just as a disclaimer, as a parent and a responsible adult, for anyone that Googles chat roulette, don't Google chat roulette. Go and have a look at Hopin, and what they've developed, as you said, is effectively a kind of random meetup. So if I hit into the networking button, it will just connect me with somebody who else is in that conference that wants to chat as well. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a little cleverer than that. They'll have looked at your interest to do that sort of speed dating, really.
Yeah, but that for me, Shane, is a really interesting improvement on the physical world, because actually there are, and I'm sure it's probably Pareto's law here, a small number of people that are good networkers that will work a room and will quite happily go over and chat to somebody they've never met before. And I put you, Shane, as exemplar at that. You're great at connecting and networking. But many of us, and I put myself in the other pot, find it a bit awkward. So this technology takes that way. Is actually, if you press the button, the hard work of saying hello to somebody you don't know, is the technology does that for you.
Yeah, I agree. And actually, it's nice you say, good at networking, but the tendency is you go to an event where you're well known and you just spend all your time with people you already know. So yeah. I agree. I think, that functionality, breaking down barriers is very helpful. It was very easy to network through the chat function. You could connect directly with people, and also the engagement. I think what I really liked, it was much more, as a moderator, possible to take questions from the audience really quickly, because I know you do loads of speaking, and you do it extremely well, where you're dual devicing, and you're maybe you've got your you've got one device open on the stage where you're taking a chat stream from another technology on a real stage, but this actually made that just integrated and super easy. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that is a real headache and a real challenge in the physical world, is trying to keep an eye on if you've got comments coming in, particularly if you've let people via a Twitter wall or something like that. And again, I'm sure a lot of people listening in will be familiar with this now with Zoom and those platforms, is that you've got chats going on whilst you're trying to hold a meeting, or if you're trying to present something. So it certainly seems to have ticked those boxes.
It did, but I think there was another lesson there, and I think you mentioned it sort of almost, we go to events where there's massive Twitter streams, and you do need moderators. And one of the things, again, that you've got to really clearly signpost if you're going to use these tools, it's almost chat etiquette. So explaining to delegates, if you want to say that you're enjoying the sunshine down in Cornwall to your mates, then you do that in the direct messaging, not in the open chat stream that everybody's seeing for the leaders, that are providing the keynotes. So I think you need quite nice but clear,
balance, isn't it, I guess, because you want to have that, you want to inject some kind of community and social. But yeah, it's, if you and I were chatting about what we're going to do at the weekend and listening in at a physical event, we wouldn't do it at a volume that the rest of the room were hearing. That's what you mean, is trying to think about the appropriateness of what you're trying to communicate and say.
Yeah, and the organisers need to have really clear signposting on that. And again, they did a really good job on it. But it's because we're all learning about using the new tool.
Yeah. That was what struck me, is it's an education thing as well, is that they're very brave from a point of view of using that platform and using it well. From what I experienced as a delegate yesterday, it's new to a lot of us. So over time, as more events, I suspect, and that's why it struck us as a really interesting thing to talk about, your experience with this, Shane, is that a lot of people are going to have to wrestle with, how do we put our conference or our event, whether that's external or internal, together, and this may well be a blueprint for moving forward.
Absolutely. And like any event, people who run massive events, enormous amounts of planning and preparation go in. I mean, this was done in an incredibly tight timescale.
4 weeks, you said, I think.
Weeks, but still the importance of rehearsing, the trying the tech, and I think they'll be very honest that there were a few things at the last minute which were like, oh, this isn't quite what we hoped. But the preparation and planning is absolutely key. And I think also we've got to bear in mind, as we go through this and we all get more used to it, you're going to have to sort of really engage the audience in different ways, because it was fairly sort of, I suppose, standard presentation slides and speaker from their own rooms. But I think the ante is going to have to go up with things like, more fast paced, trying different things, maybe very short, sharp, maybe more co-creation with the audience. Let's face it, the audience are all on, they're all streaming. How do you engage them? Is it through gamification? So I think we're going to see lots of experimentation. Are we going to see more like TED Talks, which you switch to video?
Interesting. And it rounds the circle very neatly, Shane, is that what you've just described is it's not about the technology's there, whether it's on a tracker of 8,000 or whether it's technology like Hop-on to create this event that you just mentioned. It's what you do with that technology. So again, the reminder and perhaps the point to leave it on today is go and have a look at these technologies. But before you do that, think about how you're going to use it, who it's for, and the content and the fuel that goes within that to make the best possible experience.
I think that's great advice, Steve, particularly for if you're going to spend money on sponsoring this. I think it's the sponsors that are going to have to work hardest to make their virtual booths work. And a real shout out to Integrate at Get Stacked, who did a fabulous job. And in fact, all the sponsors did on trying new things to involve the audience. So I think it's there that we're going to see the innovation.
Good. Okay. Thank you, Shane. And on that subject of involving the audience, thank you for listening to us. That's the end of this episode. But if you do want to get in touch with us, you can find us. What we've learned is available at wwlpodcast.co.uk. Equally, you can find Shane and I on LinkedIn and Twitter. We'd love to hear from you as our audience. Thoughts, questions, or indeed, if you want to get involved, if you'd like to come and share your story on what we've talked about today or in previous episodes, or indeed you've got a new idea, we'd love to hear from you. So we'll leave it at that. Shane, thank you so much. We'll speak to you in a week. And thanks everybody else. Stay well.